Welcome to the Binge Eating to Food Freedom podcast for driven hearts and minds. If you pour your best self into everything you do, and yet food takes up so much energy that it pulls you away from what matters most, you're in the right place. I'm Katie Papo, and I'm here to help you create a healthy relationship with food that supports you to live your highest and best life. And for an extra edge, become a food freedom insider. Each week, I'll give you free, practical wisdom you can actually use in your daily life and more. Just head to katiepapo.com/resources or check the show notes. Without further ado, let's dive into the episode.
Hello, and welcome to another episode. Before we dive into today's topic, I just wanted to address something that many of you have been reaching out about. So I'd like to formally and very happily announce that the Food Freedom Intensive is now open. I have said in previous episodes that I'm not taking any new clients right now, but now officially registration is finally open, and we will begin working together to make food a non-issue for you and end any compulsive patterns you have around food starting on April 6th. That's April 6th, 2025. The program will start and you can register now. And I'll give you more information at the end of the episode, so stick around till the end if you want to learn more about that. But for now, let's dive into today's topic. So today we're talking about willpower, that no matter how disciplined we try to be, we always seem to give in eventually. And across the board, willpower is probably the main thing that all of us think we need more of, whether we're trying to stick to a diet or follow a meal plan from a nutritionist or just follow our own food rules. And when we feel out of control with our eating, the natural instinct is to think that the solution is more control, more willpower, more discipline. But here's the thing. What if willpower is actually part of the problem? Now, stay with me, because to really understand this, we have to look at what's happening beneath the surface with binge eating, food addiction, emotional eating. These are all compulsive behaviors. And what does compulsive mean? It means that it feels out of our control. So naturally, we try to gain control by using willpower. And this makes sense in some cases, like with drug or alcohol addiction, abstinence is the goal. And certain programs like Overeaters Anonymous and many other programs will follow a similar model to just cut certain foods out, to treat them like drugs, to avoid at all costs. And you use your willpower, you use determination, you use support groups, anything you can to resist eating them. But there's a problem with this. Food is different. It's not like drugs or alcohol, because we need food to live. We can't just quit eating. So this goes even beyond the psychological cravings. There's actually a deeply ingrained biological response at play that prevents this from being the most effective way of going about it. And I'll explain. So human beings are wired for survival, just like any other animal. And what do we need for survival? We need air, water, food. And even if you never personally experience true starvation, your body will still respond to perceived deprivation in very powerful ways. So for example, I had a client who grew up very poor in Russia, where she had to stand outside in the cold, waiting in line, just hoping for a piece of bread before it ran out. That's real food scarcity. But now, years later, she lives in a place with lots of food, an abundance of food. She can eat whenever she wants. But her body hasn't forgotten that trauma from her childhood. Even though logically she knows food is available and she doesn't have to worry and she doesn't have to compulsively overeat to prevent herself from starving, her unconscious mind still holds on to the fear of running out. And this is where it gets really interesting. That same survival response where we compulsively overeat out of fear of running out, this can be triggered by something as simple as going on a diet. Dieting creates scarcity. The only difference is it's self-imposed. So you don't have to experience extreme food deprivation or starvation to develop compulsive overeating. In fact, for many people, one diet is all it takes to wire the brain into scarcity mode. Think about it. Have you ever been on a diet where, let's say, you couldn't have carbs for 3 months? Even though you knew you could have healthy carbs later, all you could think about was bread, pasta, cookies. All these foods were forbidden, so you wanted them more than ever. Or maybe you did a 30-day challenge of no sugar. Even if you felt amazing during those 30 days and you fully believed in the benefits of not eating sugar, what happened when it ended? You had one cookie, which then spiraled into a whole box of cookies. So it's not that you just gave in or didn't try hard enough. The compulsion to binge isn't a logical thing. I remember I used to obsessively research the dangers of sugar, thinking that if I learned more about how bad it really was, I would have the willpower to stop eating it. But no matter how much I knew about sugar, no matter how many articles I read or how convinced I was that sugar was harmful, my compulsion to eat it was still stronger than my logical reasoning. In fact, the more I learned about the harms of sugar, the more I would then binge on it. And then I would feel even worse because I thought to myself, I know this is bad. Why am I doing it? So we can already start to see there's a force beneath the surface that goes beyond willpower, beyond logical reasoning, beyond self-control. We can see that the restriction itself is fueling the cravings. And this is the real reason why willpower not only fails, but is part of the problem. This is why dieting fails more than 95% of the time. It's not because we're lazy or weak or we don't have enough willpower. It's because dieting itself triggers a survival response that overrides willpower. And I'm not saying that willpower is bad. Willpower is not bad. It's just the way that we're using it. The way that we're using it to try to stop eating certain foods is fueling the problem that restriction causes. It's fueling the backlash of the binge. So the problem isn't that we don't have enough willpower. The problem is how we're using it. We don't have a willpower problem. We have a strategy problem. Because right now, we're just using willpower to try to stick to certain food rules. We're trying to use it to fight cravings, resist temptation, to avoid bad foods. But every time we use willpower to do this, we're re-triggering the scarcity response that makes us want these foods even more. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. We put all this pressure trying to hold it down, but then the second we let go, it bursts to the surface with even more force. This is what happens when we diet. We push down the cravings with willpower for a while. We'll try to distract ourselves, try to sit with the urge, try to fight it, but eventually it will bounce back stronger. And you want to know something really interesting? A couple months ago, I asked hundreds of people struggling with binge eating. I asked, what's the worst advice you ever got on how to stop binge eating? What's the worst advice? You want to know the most common answer? The worst advice that most people got to stop binge eating was just try harder. And people were writing how this is such an awful thing to say to someone who struggles with binge eating, how people don't understand that just trying harder doesn't work, that we can't just stop if we want to. But isn't it interesting that this is exactly what we tell ourselves every day? We continue to give ourselves the worst advice that we've ever heard from other people. We tell ourselves every day, just don't give in. Just try harder today. Just have more control. But I found this doesn't even make sense because most of the people I see struggling with binge eating are already very strong-willed individuals. They clearly have willpower in other areas of life, and I did too. If we need to save money for something important, we will cut back on spending in other areas. We will have the discipline to do that. If we need to study for an exam, we will focus. We will get it done. A lot of us have done really well in school. If we need to work extra to get a promotion, no problem. We have the discipline, the willpower to do that. So why is it that in any other area of life, we have willpower, but somehow with food, we don't? So isn't it strange that all of us are trying to figure out how to have more willpower, but we're not even asking ourselves the question, is there a better strategy than willpower? Why does nobody ask this? Why is it that when it comes to food, we never stop to question if there's a better strategy? Instead, we just assume that we are the problem, that we don't have enough willpower. I believe one of the reasons we don't ask this question is because there's this widely accepted notion that we're just stuck like this, that this is the problem that we've been given in this life. So therefore, we have no choice but to spend our lives managing it, coping with it, controlling it, trying to have as much willpower as we possibly can. And why do we believe this? Because somebody, whether it was a therapist or a doctor or society, someone told us that this is the reality. And I don't think people mean to be harmful when they're saying these things. People don't know what they don't know. But I think it's dangerous to tell someone that they're stuck a certain way, that their struggle is permanent, and their only option is to manage it. Because when we believe that, the only question left to ask is, well, how do I fight this thing that's always going to be here? And what an exhausting existence that is. And for years, this was me. I thought I just had to be more disciplined, more in control, managing my urges for the rest of my life. But at some point, I started noticing something. That there were plenty of people around me who didn't struggle with food the way I did. And I'm not just talking about people with fast metabolisms or people who just never cared about their health or food. I'm talking about people who seemed to genuinely eat healthy, but they did it in an effortless way. They weren't following some strict food rules. They weren't on a diet. They weren't obsessing over every bite. They weren't trying to use willpower to stop themselves from eating. I remember watching someone eat a piece of cake and they had a few bites and then they just stopped. Like they just stopped because they were satisfied. They weren't forcing themselves to stop. It was like their body just told them, that's enough. And then they were able to stop. And that's when it started to hit me. These normal eaters, they weren't fighting cravings all the time. They weren't eating healthy because of willpower. They weren't planning all their meals in advance. They weren't monitoring their environment to make sure they didn't give in to temptations. They just seemed to eat when they were hungry and stop when they were full and not think about it beyond that. So this became my new goal. This was what I wanted. I didn't want to have to battle urges for the rest of my life. I wanted to eat healthy without having to obsess over it. And I wanted to enjoy food while I was eating without the fear that just one bite of something would send me spiraling. So I started asking myself a different question. I stopped asking, how do I have more willpower? And I started asking, how do I become more like that? because I realized food was taking up so much time and energy in my life. It was constantly on my mind. My evenings revolved around it. And I had a vision for myself to be this highest and best version for myself. I had goals, but deep down, I knew that if food was taking up so much of my life, I would never be able to step into that version of myself. So yes, stopping the binge eating was my first priority because I really was afraid for my health. But beyond that, I felt this deeper calling that I didn't want to just manage this struggle. I wanted food to be a true non-issue for me so I could be free to grow and focus on what really mattered to me. So then the big question became, how do I make food a non-issue when right now it feels like my biggest issue? This is the new question. And if you've listened to my podcast, you've heard the stories. People who have struggled with binge eating or mental obsession with food for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, last week, 60 plus years. And yet they all made peace with food using the exact approach that I'm going to share with you now. So I'll start by saying, no matter how long you've struggled, you are not stuck like this. You do not have to manage this for the rest of your life. There is a way out. That being said, what I'm about to explain is not a quote-unquote quick fix. If quick fixes worked, none of us would be here right now, right? We've all tried them. And at best, we end up back where we started. At worst, things get much worse for us. More health issues, more mental obsessions. I know this firsthand because I've lived this. So know that the process I'm about to explain is not a quick fix, but it is completely doable. It's not about spending your life managing cravings or fighting food. It's about rewiring your brain and body's response to food. So essentially what this process does is it takes you from being compulsive around food to being one of those normal eaters who can have the few bites of cake and then just be happily done. And I call it the rewired eating framework, which is a 4-step process where you don't rely on willpower, but you rewire your brain and body to shift out of the mode that they've been in. So let's get into the steps. And there are 4 steps or phases, and each one builds on the last. The first phase is called the reset. But when I say reset, I'm not talking about a one-time event that's just over and done with when you do it once. What I'm talking about is a deep shift in your nervous system. This is the part of you that's been conditioned by past food scarcity and restriction and deprivation. So remember the example, my client who grew up very poor in Russia and spent her childhood just hoping for a piece of bread? Even though she was no longer in that environment, her nervous system still carried that fear of scarcity, which was fueling her compulsive overeating. And this is what happens to so many of us through dieting, weight loss programs, so many other willpower-based things that we've tried. And intellectually, we can tell ourselves not to binge, but our nervous system has been wired to feel like food is now an urgent thing. So in this phase, you're not trying to control food with willpower anymore. There are no restrictions. Instead, we're focusing on training our nervous system to have a neutral response, a peaceful response to the food. So take cookies, for example. And if you're anything like me, you might feel like you cannot be trusted around cookies. But look at the cookies. They're neutral. They have no power on their own. They're just sitting there. But it feels like they're calling to us. You know that saying when someone says, oh, it was calling to me, like the ice cream was calling to me from the freezer? That's that energy of compulsion. But it's not happening because of the ice cream. That calling is coming from you. It's not coming from the freezer. So in this first phase of the reset, you're not changing anything about the cookies or the ice cream. What you're focusing on is your internal reaction to them. So those same cookies can still be in your house, but instead of you feeling like they have control over you, you start to forget that they're even there. And a lot of my clients experience this exact thing within their first week or so, that these foods that they were once obsessed over stop calling to them and they forget they were even in the house. Why does this happen? Because the cravings are quieting down. The nervous system is becoming more regulated. I like to give the analogy of a speeding train. When a train is moving really fast, if you look out the window, what do you see? You just see a blur. You can't see anything clearly. That's what it's like when we're in compulsive mode. Everything is happening so quickly, before we even know it, we've already opened and started eating the bag of chips. But if the train slows down, you can start to see outside, right? You can distinguish one house from another, one tree from another. And the same thing happens when we regulate our nervous system. When we slow down, and we do this through breathing techniques, relaxation exercises, nervous system regulation, what happens is we stop feeling so out of control around food. And when the train fully stops, and this is the best part, when the train stops, you're no longer just powerlessly being taken along for the ride. Now you have a choice. You can get on a different train, go in a new direction, make a different decision. But what happens if we don't slow down? Then it's not safe to change direction. If we try to do that, the train will go off the rails. That's why willpower isn't working. We need to go into our internal reactions and change them first, slowing down the system. And if you want to hear a real example of it, listen to the podcast that I did last week with Grace. Grace is a lovely Australian woman who broke a 61-year binge restrict cycle. If you listen to that podcast from last week, she talks about this process of slowing down that played a huge role in her recovery. So if you haven't already, listen to that episode when you're done here. But that's the first phase. I call it the reset. And what we're talking about is resetting your nervous system so you're no longer stuck in these compulsive patterns. Instead, you become untriggerable around food. Now the next phase. The next phase I call receive. And all the phases start with re, so it's easy to remember. Reset, receive. So what are you receiving? You're learning to receive your body signals again. So think about when we're on a diet, we're either ignoring or we're overriding our body signals. And this can start when we're very young, even long before we've dieted. So for example, I have a friend who has a 2-year-old. He took her to the doctor for an annual checkup last week. And the doctor said, yeah, she's a little on the smaller side. She's on the smaller end of the spectrum, so just try to feed her more. And my friend said, well, we feed her as much as we can, but at a certain point, she refuses to eat because she's not hungry anymore. And the doctor said, well, what you can do is have her watch TV because then she'll be distracted. And the doctor explained that if she's distracted, she'll be able to eat past her fullness signals. And it worked. What they do now is they put the TV on while she's eating and they spoon feed her while she's distracted, and then she just mindlessly swallows the food. So basically the point is to show you that even from a very young age, things that you might not even be aware of today, we're taught to override our body's signals, to not listen to them. And if you grew up where your parents made you clean your plate and you were part of a clean plate club, this is an example of this too. And with diets, it could be the same thing, just happening in the opposite way. So let's say you tell yourself, I'm intermittent fasting. I'm not going to eat until 4 o'clock. So even if your body's really hungry, you're saying, nope, can't eat till 4. When you learn to listen and connect to your body's signals, you'll be able to not only really feel when you're hungry, but you'll feel that right moment of satisfied, where you feel like, I have the right amount of food in me right now, and this actually feels good. And you don't have the compulsion to eat more than that. That's what you start to get in step 2. So first of all, just notice, None of this so far is willpower based, right? What would you say this is based in? I would say it's based in peace and listening. Peace is the first phase because you're focused on bringing calm to your nervous system. And when you're in that calm place and things are slowed down, you can feel. You feel your body signals. So you're actually now listening. You are listening to your body for what actually feels good. The body tells you, this is what feels right for me in this moment. There is no diet in the world that can give you this level of accuracy when it comes to what physically feels the best in your body in that moment. So this is one of the most amazing skills that you can learn to have for the rest of your life, because it's going to always make you the healthiest version of yourself. And this is only on phase 2. So let's go into phase 3. In phase 3, we start focusing on what I call respond. So we have reset, receive, now respond. What does that mean? This is when we're now responding to the signals that we just received. So that way, we make choices from a place that feels good, not because we're trying to force ourselves or follow a certain plan, right? That's still willpower, but we're responding to the listening that we just did, and we're making a choice that feels good. So notice how already step by step, you're turning yourself into this so-called normal eater because you're listening to your body and then you're responding in a healthy way. And then the fourth and final phase is called repeat. So we have reset, receive, respond, and repeat. What's repeat? Repeat is when we start to ingrain the habits, so this becomes just how we are. This is the most critical step for people who tend to fall off the wagon, for people who can't seem to be consistent. That's basically you just using willpower to try to stick to a habit. But what if this was just naturally who you are? That's how we make things sustainable. And Grace, actually, who I referred to earlier from the podcast from last week, she talks about one of the things that helped her be consistent. She talks about the any amount principle, which I won't go into here because just lack of time. But listen to last week's episode and she'll talk about how this helps with consistency. Because if we're trying to constantly force something, we're still relying on willpower. A big part of how we make this sustainable is to make it pleasurable. So I'll give you a non-food example. I love playing pickleball. I never have to force myself or even put it on my calendar to play. The reason I'm consistent playing pickleball is because it feels good for me and I enjoy it, so I want to do it. This is how I feel with food now too. Now that I'm more connected to my body, I don't actually enjoy binging anymore. In fact, I can't do it anymore. And a bunch of my clients, and maybe you heard from Amy or Linda, you might have heard them literally say, I could not binge if I tried. I just can't bring myself to do it. Why is that? Because it would be pain. It wouldn't be pleasurable anymore. Because now I'm connected to my body. I don't have the compulsion to binge. And think about it. This is what the quote-unquote normal eaters say. If we talk about binging, they'll say, why would you do that to yourself? It sounds horrible. Why would you eat to the point of pain? Why would you do that? So now you can see this transition happening, where we start having this addiction or this dependency mind where we use food to cope. And then we follow these steps to shift to a normal eater, where binging doesn't even sound good anymore, but rather eating in a way that feels good sounds so much better. That's why we want to keep doing it, not because we're trying to stick to a plan and because we're terrified of falling off the wagon, but because it's just the more pleasurable thing to do. So this is essentially the rewired eating framework, reset, where we slow down the train, receive, where we can actually feel the body's signals for hunger, satisfaction, and other needs, respond, where we then respond to those needs in a healthy way out of pleasure, not out of force, and repeat, where it becomes ingrained. This process is what rewires our reaction to food. That's why it's called rewired eating. Once we've rewired our reactions, we're free. You gained a life of peace because
food is no longer an issue. It's no longer consuming your mind. It's no longer making you feel sick and tired. You're free to do anything. You could focus your attention, your energy on anything you want. And no food issue is standing in your way of growing into the next evolution of your life. And as I mentioned, this is not something that takes place overnight, but now you know the stages that it takes to get to a place where willpower becomes irrelevant, because you are already one of those normal eaters who's not trying to control their eating from a place of willpower, but is instead truly experiencing a healthy and peaceful relationship with food. And now if you're interested in the Food Freedom Intensive, which I talked about at the beginning of the episode, I'll give you a little bit more information about that now. So you already know some of the process, and this is actually how I designed the program. So the first month of the program is the reset, where you learn to train your nervous system so food is no longer triggering to you, and the urges start to fall away naturally. The second month of the program is receive, where you learn to receive and reconnect with your body's signals again. This will give you the most accuracy in how to eat in a way that truly feels good for your body, and you can use this for the rest of your life. The third month of the program is, you guessed it, respond, where you learn to respond to those signals and learn to eat healthy naturally because you want to, not from a place of force. And then the fourth month of the program is the repeat phase, where you'll learn to be consistent, not by trying to stick to the program for the rest of your life or out of fear of falling off the wagon, but so that there is no longer a wagon, that you are now just different. Just like Amy and Linda and Grace and many others, you couldn't binge like you used to if you tried. So this all in all is a 4-month program. It is the most comprehensive program that I offer, with very high levels of support in a small group environment, so you get lots of care and attention. That's why I need to limit the number of people. But you can go to katiepapo.com/programs to learn more. And I created this so you have the structure and the support to do all of this efficiently and as easily as possible, so you don't get stuck in trial and error, and you don't even have to wait for it to work. Nearly all of my clients report feeling more peaceful with food starting on their first day. And you'll hear when you listen to Grace's story from last week, she actually talks a little bit about her first day. On her first day, it was the first time since 1979 that she didn't finish her chocolate bar. But you'll hear all about that when you listen to her story. But I do want to say one more thing about the program before I go. One thing that was really important to me in creating this is that it integrates into your existing life. So you won't need, like when you're on a diet and you need to completely overhaul everything, cook separate meals for your family, or it becomes really difficult when you're traveling or just going through any life change. This is not like that. It's designed to be integrated into your life. So you will not have to overhaul anything about your life in order to participate. But, and this is a very big but, you do need to be willing to truly prioritize yourself. The people who have registered so far are very serious about making this a top priority in their lives. And actually, one of the women, which this has stuck with me since she told me this, one of the women told me that one of her big motivators for joining right now was her mom's in her early 70s with early stages of dementia, which is very close to my heart. And all her mom is talking about is what diet she's going to go on next, how many pounds she's going to lose. And my new client, she said, this is so sad to me that this is what's left in her mind. And she said, and if I keep obsessing about food the way I have, that this could be me. And now she's decided she wants to truly prioritize herself, not just try to end the habit of binge eating, but to create a truly healthy, peaceful relationship with food. So this is for people who don't just want another quick fix. This is for people, you're really ready to transform from the inside out. So if you are interested, go to katiepapo.com/programs. I wrote about the whole program in detail, and we're starting our next group on April 6th, and there are some special bonuses for this first cohort. I only take a small group of people at a time just so everyone definitely gets the care and attention that they need.
So if you do feel called to join, I encourage you to check it out soon. So with that, whether you join the program or you continue learning through the podcast, know that I am here to support you in any way I possibly can. But never let anyone tell you that you are stuck like this. Never believe for one more second that this cannot be healed. With that, I'll see you next week.
Thank you for spending time with me today. If you're ready to take the next step in your journey, become a food freedom insider at katiepapo.com/resources. You'll get free practical guidance and instant access to my foundations class. That's katiepapo.com/resources. New podcast episodes come out every week, so subscribe to the podcast now. And if this episode resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd take a moment to leave a kind review. It's very meaningful to me, and it helps other people find freedom too. I appreciate you so much, and I hope to help you further on your journey. Until next time, be gentle with yourself and others. See you next week.